Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 297. I'm the host, Kyle Lanzalone. Want to just start off by mentioning that and apologizing. We had a major tech issue on the last show. For whatever reason, Connor's audio did not pick up, and so at the last minute we had to go through, just delete everything that Connor talked about. There's a few places in the episode, unfortunately, where I do refer to Connor, and he says something that we just had to cut. So like the Paloma Verde ad for the show and a few other back and forths don't really work. But for the most part, people I think would be able to listen and at least hear the news I had on Yemen and Afghanistan from the last show. It was a shorter show, and I will try to do something to make that up to y'all. We tried to keep the cost down here, and one of the ways that I did that was teaching myself how to essentially run a show while actually doing a show. And so for the most part, that has worked in the past. We always start off the shows with sound checks and everything like that, so I'm not exactly sure how this happened, but we are going to do some testing this week to make sure that it does not happen again. And then Connor will be back this week, and I'm guessing we'll have a little bit longer of an Iran update for all of us. We do have all that content that he is going to run through, I guess, from 2 weeks now, coming up later this week. All right, everybody, so if you would like to subscribe to the show, you can do that on YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey for the video version. The show, of course, is hosted at the Libertarian Institute, where I am the news editor and write usually 1 or 2 articles for the Institute Sunday through Friday on important news stories going on, usually related to foreign policy. You can also find my work at antiwar.com, where I'm the opinion editor. We reprint the show on the blog at antiwar.com, and then I write for antiwar.com. Typically on Sundays, I'll write a couple news stories there. Right now at antiwar.com, we are hosting a fundraiser, so if you like to donate and help support good independent journalism, I would really appreciate that. And then you can also support the show just by sharing it wherever you like to listen. I'm no longer on Facebook, so we're not really posting the show on Facebook ourselves much anymore, but you can always find the show on Twitter. My account is Kyle _. The show's account is Con_interest. And then you can help the show by helping our sponsor, Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Promo code PEACE, home to high quality CBD products. Their lab test results are right there on the website. Everything I've gotten from Paloma Verde has worked as expected. The soft gels, the extracts, the gummies, they all contain, the amount of CBD that they say on there. And then, you get the effects. The gummies are great for taking a little bit of edge off. If you need a lot more stress relief, a lot more muscle relief, the extracts are work very well. I personally like the topicals, and so I use the sports cream quite often. Works really well for any kind of muscle pain I have. Lasts a long time, smells great. And I was actually at the store looking for somebody I knew wanted some lidocaine patches. I went to get them some. They're almost sold out at Walgreens. And so, with supply chain issues being what they are, I've never had a problem getting my products from Paloma Verde in just a few days. Their shipping times are pretty quick. So you want some high quality CBD products, you want them quick, you want to support the show at the same time, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Use the promo code PEACE. When you spend $75 or more, you get a 20% discount, so you get your CBD at a really good price. But the show also gets a kickback on that, and so it's one of the ways that we help cover any costs that we incur at this show, and look to save up to some money to do some improvement in the future. Again, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code PEACE, and here we go. First article today is from myself and Will Porter at the Libertarian Institute, published July 1st. Biden says U.S. must lead world. President Joe Biden has declared that the United States is still at the pinnacle of global power and best suited to lead the world despite the Supreme Court's recent destabilizing ruling on abortion, soaring inflation, and growing civil unrest. Speaking after the conclusion of the latest NATO summit in Madrid on Thursday, Biden said that world leaders lavished him with praise throughout the 3-day event, claiming he had not seen one person come up to him say anything other than, "Thank you for America's leadership. You've changed the dynamic in NATO and the G7." Now, obviously, that anybody who only gets showered with praise should probably be worried that he's surrounded with sycophants, but never mind you, this is informing Biden's position on America's global standing. He said, "America is better positioned to lead the world than we have ever been. We have the strongest economy in the world. Our inflation rates are lower than other nations in the world," he continued. "I'm sure that's going to make Americans feel much better, though, knowing that other countries are suffering from more inflation than us." While the president said the Supreme Court's decision to overturn the landmark Roe v. Wade abortion case last week was destabilizing for the country, he insisted international observers haven't found one person, one world leader, to say America is going backwards. Aside from the ruling, which he claimed to be essentially challenged the right to privacy, and the U.S. has been a leader in the world in terms of personal rights and privacy rights, Biden says, and it is a mistake in my view for the Supreme Court to do what they did. However, a number of countries in attendance at NATO summit have been more critical than Biden led on, with Prime Minister Boris Johnson stating that the U.S. took a big step backwards with the Roe decision, while Canadian Premier Justin Trudeau said that the U.S. ruling was horrific. Leaders in Greece, Germany, Belgium, and Luxembourg have cited similar concerns in public. Moreover, a U.S. sanctions campaign in retaliation for the Russian attack on Ukraine has also created economic havoc for American allies and the United States itself, helping to drive up a global energy crisis while doing little harm to Russian oil revenues. Russia's currency, the ruble, has rallied despite the penalties, becoming one of the world's best performing currencies against the dollar. And so, there's a lot here, and I really don't want to get into the abortion stuff. It's not what I cover. But the stuff I do cover that I do really want to talk about that are really important in this article. One, I think there's an absurd amount of hypocrisy from the Europeans here. Even if they maybe some of these countries do have more liberal, more abortion access for women than certain U.S. states, there are still U.S. states that are going to be far more affirming of abortion access than almost any European country. A lot of these states don't even have, abortion into the second and third terms. But moreover, you got Boris Johnson here, who is spending billions and billions of dollars on the war in Ukraine, right? And now Ukrainian refugees are starting to reach the UK, and he is saying that if you come to this country undocumented, we will ship you to Rwanda, right? They're going to send Ukrainians to the middle of Africa if they show up to the UK without proper documentation. Now, feel how you feel about, the immigration situation and all of this. The UK is heavily involved in the Ukraine war and is using the Ukrainians to weaken the Russians to help strengthen the American UK global position. And so, yeah, it's absolutely absurd to send these people to Africa, and then of course to threaten to do that at the same time moralize about the Supreme Court, changing the federal abortion standard, so there's no longer a federal guarantee. And so again, now different states have different abortion laws. All right, now moving on. I want to get into a lot of what happened, a lot of the statements during Biden's trip to Europe last week. That's from Dave DeCamp. G7 pledges to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. This from June 27th at antiwar.com. The leaders of the G7 nations pledged open-ended support for the Ukraine after the second day of a 3-day summit in Germany. In a statement, the leaders of U.S., Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and Canada said they would provide Ukraine with military, economic, and humanitarian assistance for as long as it takes. We will continue to provide financial, humanitarian, military, and diplomatic support and stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. The leaders of the G7 said they are committed to sustaining and intensifying international economic and political pressures on Russia and Belarus with sanctions. So we got world leaders doubling down in Germany, and then of course we end up with a similar, kind of says statements coming out of Madrid for the NATO summit. Biden says U.S. will beef up military presence in Europe as NATO summit begins in Madrid. President Biden kicked off his 3-day visit to a NATO summit in Madrid by announcing that the U.S. plans to increase its military presence in Europe. Speaking with Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, Biden said that the U.S. will increase the number of U.S. Navy destroyers stationed at a naval base in Rota, Spain, from 4 to 6. The president said that that this was the first of multiple announcements that the U.S. and NATO will make at the summit on increasing forces in Europe's steps being taken in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so let's start to look at some of these announcements. The largest one is NATO to increase high readiness force to over 300,000 troops. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced Monday that the alliance will increase its high readiness force from 40,000 to over 300,000 as a part of a plan he called the biggest overhaul of our collective defense and deterrence since the Cold War. The NATO Response Force was formed in 2003 and was activated in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The entire force wasn't deployed, but several thousand troops from the U.S. and other countries were sent to Eastern Europe as a part of the response force. The U.S. currently has over 100,000 troops stationed in Europe for the first time since 2005 as a result of NATO bolstering its forces on what it calls its eastern flank. Stoltenberg outlined plans to make the reinforcements more permanent that will officially be announced in the upcoming NATO summit in Madrid, which starts Tuesday. All right, now let's look at the permanent U.S. base in Poland. U.S. to establish permanent base in Poland as a part of Europe military expansion. President Biden announced Wednesday during the NATO summit in Madrid that the U.S. will take steps that will increase its military presence in Europe, including the establishment of permanent military bases in Poland. The base in Poland will mark the first time the U.S. will establish an official permanent military facility in an area known as NATO's eastern flank. These are all the countries that border, I think, Belarus, the Baltics, the Black Sea states. The U.S. military presence elsewhere in Eastern Europe and in the Baltics is technically on a rotational basis, though Washington has no plans to scale back its presence in the region. Under the 1997 NATO-Russia Founding Act, NATO agreed not to establish permanent military presence east of Germany. U.S. officials insist the base in Poland does not violate the act since it's only a permanent facility and the troops will be deployed rotationally, but it's unlikely Moscow will see it that way. And it's absolutely absurd that the U.S. would never look at it this way if, say, an equivalent happened in Cuba or something like that, where the Russians say, oh, we'll never establish a permanent base there. But, every once in a while, one of the troops dies, and so we send somebody new. And so they're not permanent. They're just stationed there for a while. And that doesn't violate the treaty. This is obviously an absurd argument and is just provoking tensions with Russia. A part of this plan, too, calls for the U.S. to deploy additional F-35s to the U.K. All right, so during we have a lot happening at the NATO summit. One of the most important things that happens is Turkey works out a deal with Finland and Sweden to lift a weeks-long hold on those countries' NATO bids. Now, this had some fallout, and so this is kind of what I want to start getting into here. I'll get into all the deal nets, but I think this is really important. I wrote this article for the Libertarian Institute on June 29th. Ukraine sees Finland and Sweden's NATO membership as new prospect to join. Russia and Ukraine are reacting to Turkey's lifting its weeks-long hold on Finland and Sweden's NATO bid. Kiev views NATO opening the door for Helsinki and Stockholm as a new chance at entering the alliance. In contrast, Moscow considers the latest round NATO expansion a threat to Russia. The most senior representative of the Ukrainian government in Madrid for the NATO summit took note of the expedited process Finland and Sweden went through and indicated Kiev could follow a similar path. We have noted this possibility, he told European Pravda. Gaining entrance into NATO typically takes years. Ukraine has been on the path to membership since 2008. However, the two Nordic states will likely join NATO within months of expressing interest. He said, "Today, during the war, it is difficult to say Ukraine does not meet NATO standards, whether in terms of strategy or tactics of military actions. Ukraine is at war not with the world's second army, but with the weakest one, and we have proved every day that we are compatible with NATO standards." Now, I think he's really misrepresenting what the NATO standards are. There are NATO standards around, military spending and things like that. But I think a lot of the NATO standards also had to do with corruption, democracy, and things like internal things that go on within a country, where Ukraine really hasn't been improving at all since the start of the war. In a separate interview, the official expressed that Kiev is still seeking protection under NATO's Article 5 Mutual Defense Pact, saying, "We still think that NATO guarantees are the best ever." After Turkey announced it was lifting its block on Helsinki and Stockholm, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg told reporters the alliance was open to growth. He said, "The move sends a very clear message to President Vladimir Putin that NATO's door is open." Moscow has reacted harshly to NATO adding two countries. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov warned that the move will lead to more destabilization. "We consider the expansion of the North Atlantic Alliance a purely destabilizing factor in international affairs." He added that Moscow views further expansion as a part of aggressive containment targeting Russia. Ryabkov stated the Kremlin was also concerned about the forthcoming NATO document that will label Russia a threat. "A new strategic concept will be added where Russia is going to be called a threat to the alliance. This has nothing to do with real life. It is the alliance that poses a threat to us." Ryabkov stated Moscow would take compensatory measures in response, and didn't really lay out what those were at all. So, a couple things here that I think are worth noting. One, there does seem to be some, conflicting statements coming out of the Kremlin, which you see a lot less than, I think, from the White House, where Putin had said that, Finland and Sweden joining NATO wasn't necessarily a threat to the alliance, or it wasn't a threat to Russia. It was the expansion of NATO military facilities into those Nordic states that would then present a threat to Russia. Now, this statement from Ryabkov does seem to contradict that, and something definitely to be mindful of. Now, the one thing I will say is everybody involved, particularly on the NATO side, has been very vocal about saying that we're not going to take putting NATO bases and things like that in Finland and Sweden off the table. And so, maybe the Kremlin has taken this as, we tried to make an offer, but it was essentially ignored there. All right, now let's talk about the Turkey, Sweden, Finland deal. This from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com on June 28th. And by the way, on the last show I talked about this. I did mention that I thought it was possible that a deal could get done because Turkey's president Recep Tayyip Erdogan was meeting with the leaders of Finland and Sweden before the NATO summit. And I thought maybe the reason for that, and I knew that Biden had a meeting with Erdogan, was that they were actually going to put together a deal. As Peter Van Buren points out, deals really aren't negotiated between leaders at summits. It's not like, these three leaders are going to sit down in a room and hammer out an entire agreement. These things have to almost be ready to go by the time you get everybody sitting, all the leaders sitting in a room together. So Dave writes, Turkey agreed on Tuesday to lift its objections to Finland and Sweden joining NATO, paving the way for the two Nordic countries to begin their application process at this week's NATO summit in Madrid. Finnish president released a statement, said that he and Swedish prime minister held talks with Turkish president in Madrid and were facilitated by NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. The three NATO leaders signed a joint memorandum that said Turkey would support the Nordic nations' NATO bid at the upcoming summit. The Finnish president said that the memorandum outlined that Turkey, Finland, and Sweden agreed to extend their full support to threats against each other's security. Turkey initially objected to Finland and Sweden joining NATO due to their alleged ties with the PKK, a Kurdish militant group the US, EU, and Turkey consider a terrorist organization. Erdogan also wanted the Nordic nations to lift export controls on weapons placed on Turkey in response to a Turkish assault on northeast Syria in 2019. I'm pretty sure that was the ethnic cleansing of Afrin. According to a leaked copy of the memorandum posted to Twitter by a Reuters reporter, Sweden and Finland agreed to lift the arms embargo on Turkey, and they said it would not provide support to the YPG in Syria, which is a part of the Kurdish-led SDF group that receives support from the United States. And so this is really interesting. I wonder if Turkey is attempting to use any leverage with the United States to get them to also scale back their support for the PKK, although the PKK are not, I guess in Syria, the PKK is the YPG, the Syrian Kurdish group, and without the YPG, the U.S. would lose their excuse to occupy Syria. Finland and Sweden also confirmed their belief that the PKK is a terrorist organization and vowed to take steps to prevent the activities of the groups. They also said that they would address Turkey's request for the extradition of suspected terrorists. Now, this got interesting real fast because about a day or two later, we have Turkey to seek extradition of terror suspects from Finland and Sweden after NATO deal, and Turkish Justice Minister said Wednesday that Turkey will seek the extradition of 33 terror suspects from Sweden and Finland. And then Erdogan went on to actually leverage the continued progress of Finland and Sweden's NATO bid to say, if these extraditions aren't met, then we're not going to do it. There's so much really important news right here. I guess the most amazing part about this is, there really is some kind of crazy truth where it's not a true imperial war if the Kurds don't somehow get screwed on the end of this deal, and that's exactly what we're seeing here. It's not just that they're condemning the PKK as a terrorist group, because the PKK has carried out terrorists suicide bombing type attacks and targeted civilian infrastructure and everything like that, but ramping up the military support for Ankara's war against their Kurdish minority is very disturbing. And look, maybe the list of people extradited are all people involved in killing innocent civilians, but my guess is that's not the case. Turkey carries out a very brutal political repression campaign against the Turkish Kurds, and I'm expecting that will ramp up, and that's really, as we talked about from the beginning, what Turkey really wanted out of this wasn't a whole lot of concern for these two countries joining NATO, and I suspected that these countries would join NATO whether they caved to Turkey's demands or not, but I do think we saw Ankara here basically kind of carry out a blackmail campaign, and they got a lot for it. They're going to get the extradition of a lot of Kurds. One of the places in Europe where there's a lot of support for the Kurdish movements, where it's not quite so much, I guess, where they're just used as pawns. They're actually protecting these people from extradition to Turkey. They're actually stopping arms shipments to Turkey in order to help the Kurds, and then of course they all roll back on this just a couple of years later in order to get into NATO. Also very important here, Biden administration throws support behind F-16 sale to Turkey. On Wednesday, the Biden administration expressed public support for an F-16 sale to Turkey, which came the day after Ankara lifted its objection to Sweden and Finland joining NATO. Back in October Turkey requested to buy 40 Lockheed Martin-made F-16 fighter jets and nearly 80 modernization kits for its current fleet of warplanes. Wednesday marked the first time that the Biden administration made its support for the potential deal known. Strong Turkish defense capabilities contribute to strong NATO defense capabilities, the Assistant Secretary for Defense for International Security Affairs said. The U.S. Department of Defense fully supports Turkey's modernization plans for its F-16 fleet. Turkish President Erdogan met with President Biden on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Madrid on Wednesday, and the two leaders held talks for about an hour. The F-16 deal was expected to be a priority of the meeting, but it's not clear if the issue was discussed. In a readout of the meeting, the White House said Biden welcomed Turkey's conclusion of a trilateral agreement with Finland and Sweden that paved the way for allies to invite them to join NATO. And of course, I do think that these weapons will most likely be used against Kurds either in Iraq, Syria, or Turkey. Another discussion at the NATO summit was Janet Yellen's brainchild idea of price caps. I wrote this with Will Porter at the Libertarian Institute on June 29th. Leaders in the Group of Seven have vowed to impose price caps on Russian oil, hoping they will stop Moscow from reaping the benefits of soaring energy prices to wean itself off the country's exports. After wrapping up a summit in Germany on Tuesday, the G7 issued a final communique outlining that it would inflict severe and immediate economic costs on Moscow in retaliation for its attack on Ukraine, including Russia's energy industry. As for oil, we will consider a range of approaches, including options for a possible comprehensive prohibition on all services which enable the transportation of Russian seaborne crude and petroleum products globally unless oil is purchased at or below a price to be agreed in consultation with international partners. And so what it sounds like is they're saying that we're going to say either one of two things, I guess, that the price of Russian oil you can never pay over $130 a barrel for Russian oil, right? That's going to be considered like a violation of sanctions, right? Or they're going to say that you have to pay 10% less for Russian oil than the market price. Not sure which one it is. If it's the first one, I think it's going to be probably maybe more problematic, or it could be irrelevant if the price of oil drops. But my guess is that it would be more problematic to the world economy, just because you have some pretty big gas. If oil goes up to $200 a barrel, then that changes things quite a lot versus if it's $140. Now, if it's a 10%, it's locked in there, so it's always going to just be 10%, and you know what it is. It's a little bit more predictable. But then, if the price of oil drops, it doesn't necessarily negate this price cap entirely. Though the G7 nations, US, UK, France, Italy, Germany, Japan, and Canada, have brought a raft of sanctions aiming to cripple the Russian economy, some declaring full embargoes, those efforts appear to have backfired. Europe has curbed some of its imports, but Moscow has found other trading partners in Asia to compensate for the lost markets and its energy revenues that are now surpassing pre-war levels. The Russian currency, meanwhile, took a significant hit soon after the sanctions spree kicked off, but since has rebounded, is now one of the best performing currencies against the dollar. All right. Oh, and Yellen says that this won't cause more inflation for some reason. Doesn't really explain why that's the case, just kind of says that. We also had the West announcing a new round of sanctions last week. This from Dave DeCamp on the 28th at antiwar.com. The U.S. Treasury Department said Tuesday announced new sanctions on Russia that target the country's defense industrial base and enacted a ban on the import of Russian gold. The gold ban was done in coordination with the UK, Japan, and Canada, but is largely a symbolic measure as Russian gold exports to the West have been virtually non-existent in recent months. Early on in the war in Ukraine, Western nations nation sanctioned Russia's largest gold trading bank and other financial institutions. According to Reuters, the vast majority of Russia's gold exports previously went to the UK's bullion market, but those sales have plummeted. In February, Britain exported 29 tons worth of worth 1.7 billion from Russia in March, from Russia in March. The import of Russian gold to the UK dropped to just 26 kilograms, and so quite a big difference. President Biden announced the ban over the weekend and said Russia rates in tens of billions of dollars from the sale of gold, but there are still plenty of buyers for Russian gold, including the country's central bank, individuals inside Russia who are buying the precious metal as an investment, and Asian countries, most of which haven't sanctioned Russia. Russia's gold exports have already been rerouted since the start of the war, following eastward rather than westward, reflecting sanctions from Western world gold market participants, somebody told Reuters. An analyst for the Swiss bank told Reuters. The other sanctions the Treasury Department announced Tuesday targeted 70 entities and 29 individuals involved in Russia's defense, industrial, technology, and manufacturing sectors. Including on the list were Rostec, a Russian state-owned defense conglomerate. I don't think I have too much to add on to that. Just kind of more on the sanctions and seeing how they're compounding and piling up. And, kind of like what we see on Iran, where the U.S. has, in the Western countries, have now piled so many sanctions on Russia that, so first they sanctioned all the gold banks, right? And then now they're sanctioning the gold. But once you sanction the gold banks, you really don't need to sanction the gold too. All right. So maybe the most problematic thing going on in the world right now is Lithuania's blocking of rail going from Russia proper to its exclave of Kaliningrad, which is along the Black Sea and sandwiched in between Lithuania and Poland. And so Poland says the EU and Russia agree they need a plan on Kaliningrad, which is really good to hear. Hearing that the officials understand that this is a real problem and needs a resolution is very important. On Thursday, Polish Prime Minister said the EU and Russia agreed that they need to come up with a plan concerning the transit of goods through Lithuania to Kaliningrad, the Russian enclave on the Black Sea. Both sides concluded it was worth agreeing a plan that will not violate the de facto implementation of the sanctions because, frankly speaking, the Kaliningrad Oblast is a very small part of Russia. Lithuania recently started enforcing EU sanctions on goods traveling to Kaliningrad through its territory, angering Russia, which has warned of a response if the move is not reversed. And so this is good. It adds on earlier comments that we heard from European officials. And so sounds like we are maybe moving in the right direction here. Now, one of the more interesting stories that I have to talk about today is from CNN. Well, Dave DeCamp wrote this up, but originally reported by CNN. According to a report from CNN, White House officials are losing confidence that Ukraine will be able to retake all the Russian territory it has captured since it invaded on February 24th as Russian forces continue to make gains in the eastern Donbass region. Unnamed U.S. officials told CNN that President Biden's advisors have started debating if and how the U.S. should start convincing Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky he should define his definition of victory and what it looks like. And so, these stories are sometimes hard to tell what is actually going on here. If this is maybe not really a conversation that is happening in the White House. Say the White House wants to get the American people ready to hear that Ukraine, Kiev cannot retake, going back certainly not to its pre-2014 borders, but not even to its pre-February 24th borders. Now, after all this promise of victory and everything like that, this is a pretty big walk back. And so putting this story in CNN probably does start to get that process moving along. And so it's possible that that's what we're seeing here. Now, from what the conversations that we've seen in the White House, the policy that we have seen from the White House, I don't think it's necessarily impossible that we have a situation here where they're really surprised that Ukraine can't take back all this territory, and they're now having conversations about what they're going to do about it. And my guess is that there's a big counterbalance to this conversation, a lot of people who just want to send more weapons. Two more quick stories to note before I move on and start talking about the actual kind of war going on in Ukraine. Greece wants, I think, about 20 F-35s and made the official request. Of course, it's not surprising this claim comes immediately after NATO ally Turkey seemed to get support from the White House got support from the White House and will likely then be able to buy, about 120 upgraded F-16s. Turkey and Greece, probably their biggest geopolitical contenders, are both each other, even though they're both within NATO. And then Bulgaria expelled 70 Russian diplomats. Huge news here. The U.S. is sending surface-to-air missiles to Ukraine, and we had the initial write-up here from Dave DeCamp on June 27th, but I do believe that the U.S. announced that it was sending these systems, these air defense systems, to Ukraine in the latest weapons package that I announced maybe Friday. I think $840 million. But Dave writes, U.S. officials said Monday that the Biden administration is preparing to purchase a Norwegian Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile System, NASAMS, for Ukraine. And again, this weapons sale has now gone through. Now, it seems for the first time, the U.S. is maybe somewhat interested in monitoring the arms it's sending to Ukraine. An official from the Pentagon's Defense Security Cooperation Agency said Thursday that the U.S. military leaders should consider sending weapons inspectors to Ukraine to monitor the billions of dollars in arms pouring into the country. Now, I don't think the concern is that these weapons are going to Nazis. I think that the concern here is that these weapons are potentially falling into the hands of Russia or something like that, and that is essentially causing a real problem for the U.S., worrying that maybe more advanced technology is going to wind up into Moscow's hands. The U.S. is training Ukrainian forces on the multiple rocket launch systems. These are being transferred to Ukraine from the UK, but they're American-made systems, and the U.S. is training them on those systems inside of the UK. These have a range of about 50 miles, so these are potential arms weapons that could hit Russia. All right, so Snake Island. Now remember, this is, early in the war. There's a lot of war propaganda about this place and how the Ukrainian soldiers surrendered, didn't surrender, but surrendered there. Russia, which had taken it and had his forces there since the start of the war, has now withdrawn those forces. Russia said on Thursday was withdrawing its troops from Ukraine's Snake Island in the Black Sea, and this was reported by the Miami Herald. It notes that Defense Ministry spokesperson said the withdrawal was a sign of goodwill and showed Russia was not obstructing the export of grain and agricultural products from Ukraine. Ukraine says that Russia was unable to maintain its presence of soldiers there because of the Ukrainian artillery fire, and was withdrawing from that region for that reason. Now, the Ukrainian story actually sounds a little bit more true here. I think that it's far more likely that the Russian forces were chased out by Ukrainian fire. However, Russia has been in discussions for several weeks with the UN and Ankara, Turkey, to come to some kind of resolution to the situation with the grain exports from the Black Sea, Ukrainian ports. And so maybe if this was a real sticking point, maybe Moscow was really trying to send a measure of goodwill, but I can't say that at this point. And it seems more likely that it was a strategic withdrawal, because I know Ukraine has hit that island. I think with drones and things like that too. Russia attempting to resupply the island has been hit with some anti-ship missiles. So maybe it was just too much a logistical problem for Russia to maintain. All right, last article I have today. I wrote for the Libertarian Institute last week, June 29th. U.S., South Korea, Japan increase military ties over concerns about North Korea's weapons test. On the sidelines of the NATO summit in Madrid, President Biden spoke with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol. While the summit's focus is on Moscow, Washington is taking advantage of the gathering of world leaders to strengthen its military posture against Pyongyang. Biden said the Madrid conference was an opportunity to further coordinate the trilateral efforts specifically regarding the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. In the lead up to the meeting, the leaders in Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington, in the lead up to the meeting between the leaders in Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington, Pyongyang claimed that the U.S. was attempting to create an Asian version of NATO to further its sinister aims towards North Korea. And then after this meeting, by the way, I don't have this in the article because it'll just say yesterday or something like that. But the North Koreans came out and reaffirmed that, yeah, this is what we were worried about happening in this meeting. So President Biden stated that the objective of the trilateral group is the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. North Korea has a nuclear arsenal of 40 to 50 bombs. Pyongyang maintains a diluted no first use policy and claims its nukes protect it from Washington-based regime change operations. South Korea houses nearly 30,000 American soldiers that ensure the U.S. would fight to prevent invasion of and places Seoul under Washington's nuclear umbrella. The North Korean government, led by the Kim family, maintains Pyongyang will not abandon its nuclear weapons until the U.S. abandons its aggressive posture. And so there is, something really nefarious about what the Western demand is here, because they're saying to North Korea, look, we need to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. And that kind of works, except for the fact that South Korea doesn't need to house nuclear weapons because they have the defense protection of the United States of America and its thousands of nuclear bombs. And so if North Korea ever carried out an attack on South Korea, the U.S. may escalate to the point of using nuclear weapons on North Korea. And so, this is the reason that North Korea maintains that policy, and is, why the Western efforts, sound very reasonable and balanced, but they're actually very, very unfair. All three leaders said they were concerned about North Korea's increasing weapons tests in 2022, warning Pyongyang could soon conduct its seventh nuclear test. North Korea has already tested a record number of missiles in 2022. Prime Minister Kishida noted that the trilateral meeting provided a much-needed forum to discuss upgrading defense ties. The deterrence capabilities of the U.S., Japan, and U.S. Republic of Korea, that's South Korea, alliances need to be upgraded as a part of an essential effort to strengthen the trilateral partnership between the U.S., Japan, and Republic of Korea, the Japanese leader said. All right, guys, I think that's all I have on the show today. Really appreciate y'all tuning in. And again, sorry about what happened on the last episode. The show will clean that up. Don't have many blunders like that on the show, though. We've done almost 300 episodes here. Very excited. And I want to make sure people subscribe to the show. I am trying to put together a really cool show for episode 300 that I think people will enjoy. And so just be sure to subscribe somewhere. YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey for video version. Libertarian Institute is where the show is hosted. Replaying on the show at the blog at antiwar.com. At Kyle Lanslone _ on Twitter. Up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. Also on the Libertarian Institute all podcast feed. Thanks, everyone.